Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Tim Stein, and I am joined today with Judy Vitone and Wendy Conquest. Dan Drake is not able to join us today, but he will be back at future episodes. And today, we are so excited. We have Janie Lacy as our guest today. She is a CSAT who does a lot of work in Florida with women who are in recovery from love addiction, has a program called Women Redeemed that we'll talk about. But I'm really looking forward to the conversation, not only about love addiction and recovery from love addiction and what that's like for women, but Janie has done so many things in her career, and I'm looking forward to hearing about all of them. How about you, Jeannie and Wendy? What's on your mind as we're getting started on this episode?
I'm so impressed with Janie. And she has such, like you said, a body of work and in this field of relationships and also women in recovery. And so I'm curious if, how did she get there? How does she develop? What is she seen as helpful for these folks? So I'm just thrilled to kind of meander around and have a good, deep conversation. Wendy?
Yeah, I'm excited to have her on as well. And we don't talk a lot about women love addicts or women sex and love addicts. And so I think it's such an important part of the population. And we hear a lot that they don't come into recovery. And so I'm curious if Janie has found ways to get them to come in and get help. And also I listened to her TED Talk, which was done in 2021. And it was just so beautifully and brilliantly done. So I'm excited to have her with us today.
Yeah. Well, Janie, you want to join us?
Yes, I'm so glad to be here. Hi, everybody.
Hello,
Good
Janie.
morning. Good morning. It's like Christmas when someone pops into the room.
Surprise gift.
Yeah. So I'm curious of how you just got started in this field in general and then moved into love addiction or relationships, Janie?
When I was a registered intern, between a student intern and a registered intern, one of my, everything they tell you to do in grad school, right, was exactly what happened to me that you don't do, or what they at least say you don't do. But one of my first clients was a young woman who was sexually assaulted. And I was probably a new registered intern at the time. And she was brought to me. I was with a counseling center that was connected to a church. So I didn't necessarily know who I was going to see because they were getting funded by the church. And when this young woman had come into my office, I had discovered that her sexual assault had just happened literally just a few days before I had seen her. And to make a very long story short, so I worked with her a year through this church program because it was funded by the church. And through that process of working with her, there was a curiosity that was birthed as to this young woman who I had met who was sexually assaulted, that through the process of working with her, then became what they called a go-go dancer. And she became a dancer and was pretty much became her way of life. And at that time, I got real curious, like, how could somebody that was sexually assaulted, that had this huge trauma, now turn around and essentially do this type of work? So that was my first curiosity. And there was a woman who I was working with at the time who was a CSAT. And I was in a group supervision. And at the time, I had did some training through Mark Laser's program. And I remember I was mentioning that in my supervision with this group, and her name is Vicky. Vicky had mentioned that she was a CSAT, and I was curious about the CSAT program, and she had just thought it would widen my lens a little bit more than the training that I had done, and that it would help me work with this type of client. So that's kind of how I initially was birthed into being introduced to the CSAT community, and started me looking into what that looked like in order for me to start that process. So it was birthed by that client. And the amazing thing about that is that that client has not been a client for a long time, because I've been here since 2005. But she follows me on social media, and I have a very public profile, and she occasionally will send me messages, and I get to see the fruit of the work that we started so long ago. And it's just been a beautiful, beautiful process, because I know that the work that we do does make a difference, especially this particular client, which was one of my first clients, embodies that. So yeah, that's how it got started.
That's wonderful. I have a question. So is the Women Redeemed program, is it specifically for women that are struggling with sex and love addiction, or does it have a broader context? Can you tell us about it?
So Woman Redeemed is a program or multiple programs underneath the Woman Redeemed program that's actually birthed out of the legacy of my eldest sister. Her name was Carmen, and she was in a toxic relationship. And as we know, the most dangerous time for a woman is when she's leaving a domestic abusive toxic relationship. And my sister became a statistic. And when that had occurred as a young person and through the years, there was a lot of curiosity over what I've gone through in my family as a result of that. So Woman Redeemed was birthed out of her legacy because she's not here, but there are so many women that are here that have an opportunity to get to the other side and experience healthy relationships with themselves and with others. So Women Redeemed is targeted specifically towards women. The broader umbrella is toxic relationships, but because of my work in the CSAT community, we get a lot of women that identify as a sex and love addict. But most of them through the years, if we kind of just look at that broader umbrella, it's usually just experiencing just multiple unhealthy relationships, and they get to a point and they're like, I can't keep doing this. I'm getting older, or my children are being affected. There's something that draws them in. But we have very strategic ways to communicate to women without putting the label on, right? Because a lot of times people will ask that question, like, because our programs are pretty full. We have a 12-week program that I facilitate myself about 3 times a year, with the exception of last year. As most people know, I was on 90 Day Fiance, the last resort, which took 3 weeks out and some other things. So I was not able to do that last year. So we have a 3-week program, a 3-month program, I should say, for Women Redeem, which is a weekly program. And we strategically do it because it's, as we know, for just the way that the brain works, we need to have a 90-day detox period. So a lot of the women enter the program and they use it as a detox program. And then we have a retreat. So we take that 3-month and we put it in a weekend, which we literally just did on the other side of the summer. So we did that in May, and it was a phenomenal experience for the women. We bring in a group of therapists and we're all in the house. We stay in the house with them. It was a mansion here in the Florida area at the Evermore Resort. Great experience. And then I also have a membership online for women that just want to stay connected to the community. So those are kind of the three hubs that we have for the women.
So when you have women coming into your program who are, having this experience of having been in toxic relationships and are trying to sort of like change their relationship pattern, what are the biggest obstacles for them that they're struggling with, and what do you do about those?
So the biggest obstacle that we will see is that they don't know that they're in an unhealthy relationship.
Hmm.
Is that a lot of the women that come that will meet us are usually because we're out in the community. So I make it a point to speak to, like, from a marketing, especially for therapists, as a marketing tip, is we don't necessarily go out and advertise, okay, we're here to treat love addiction, but we strategically put ourselves what we would consider an avatar. So our avatar is the C-suite. I work with a lot of celebrities, so C-suite celebrities, executives, high performing women who have this other side that usually produces a lot of shame, right? So that's usually our very simplistic way, our avatar. And then we target certain areas. We go to executive women groups, we go to networking groups. And I'm not specifically talking about addiction, but I will talk about how to bloom where you're planted, how to create a personal mission statement, how to have healthy relationships in general. And then we incorporate the toxic relationships as a point somewhere along the line in the communication. And someone hears, because we're strategically implanting that, someone hears that and they're coming and thinking, I think that's me. I feel like my unhealthy relationship is preoccupying my mind. I can't really focus to this, getting to this next level. So when they come in the door, for the most part, they don't necessarily come in and say, well, hey, I'm here for a love addiction and I'm here to get help. But they're like, you know what? I'm in this relationship and I feel like it's destroying me. or I'm in this relationship and I feel like I can't leave this relationship. I feel like I can't live without them, but I can't stay either. And I just don't know what's wrong with me is usually the dominant question that they will ask. I'm smart, I'm running my business, I'm doing these other things. So the obstacle is that they normally don't have a language. They don't know what's happening to them, but they know that there's something wrong and they usually have a secret. The secret is that she can be on television, she could be a news anchor, she can be an actress, she's running a business, but yet she's in this relationship that she knows is emotionally, sometimes physically abusive. And she's thinking there's something wrong with me because by society standards, I have it all. I'm smart. So the biggest obstacle is just a lack of really what's happening and understanding her own history as to what predisposed her to be in this position.
Love what you're saying there because, not using the label, but using the descriptors. And so then people get a chance to, is that me? Oh, I do that. Oh, I have that. Well, I struggle with that. So with that kind of focus here, I heard you say difficulty leaving. Like, can we give like kind of a general description of a toxic relationship? Some of those qualifiers that people might hear and go, oh, that is me. Because I think that's really powerful when you walk in a room and you hear something and you go, oh, I didn't know, but you're talking about me, that resonating. So if you can give just a little bit more, again, of characterizations and features, that might be helpful to the people who are listening today.
Sure. So when I'm talking to the general public, I like to use a lot of also humor. So, some of the things that I will also say is, when you're in this relationship and you know that you're not getting your needs met, or you know that there's probably some things that you just feel empty inside. But just like that when you try to leave this relationship and it kind of pulls you back in, and just like a dog returns to his vomit, there you are back again, right? So a lot of times in our conversations, because we know it's a very serious thing, but when you get people to be lighthearted about their situation, it disarms them. It disarms some of the shame. So we're looking at some of their unhealthy, like obsessive type relationships, and their focus on it becomes preoccupied, and there's a lot of drama that's incorporated in their relationships, right? So when we're speaking to people, we talk about drama. It's like you don't want the drama, but you find yourself in the drama. And in those specific situations, there's a roller coaster. Come here, go away. I hate you. I love you, up and down. And let's say that you decide to leave the relationship and you decide that you want to get back in the relationship. You're hiding it from your friends because now you've blasted them to everybody and you told them like, he wasn't no good and all these other things. And now he's back there. Have you found yourself back in those situations, right? So we'll go through common scenarios that people will find themselves in, but they can relate to it. Because one of the things I do also find in our world, in our therapeutic world, and mentoring other therapists, not just a CSAT supervisor, but in the state of Florida, is we will go out and we speak a lot of therapeutic language, and people hear it and they disconnect. They automatically think that's not me. So I think it's important that we help people understand that it could be any of us. It can be literally any of us. It doesn't matter if you're educated. It doesn't matter, what color you are, what part of the world you live in, that there are certain things that we can all find ourselves in situations. So when we're speaking to people, it's important that they understand that this can be all of them. And then, we also want to address things like there's this underlying sense of abandonment, which is what keeps them in that relationship, the high anxiety that happens in these situations, and the loneliness, right? We want to look at it as they're filling this relationship. There's a big void inside them, and they're filling this relationship themselves by this relationship, and then they get addicted, right? That intermittent reinforcement, that come here, go away, and then just waiting for that person to come back around, like you're waiting for those cookie crumbs where he's going to be nice to you again, or he's going to be. And a lot of women will relate to those types of scenarios when we're speaking and just creating these situations. So we're normalizing it to a certain degree so that it reduces the shame in some of the women audiences, and I think that's so important for them to understand that it could happen to anybody.
Janie, there seems to be a lot of interest and I'm going to say preoccupation with narcissism. So women being with a narcissist, do you talk about that or address that with the women that you see?
Yes. So a lot of the women do find themselves in narcissistic abusive relationships. And I think the most difficult part for a lot of the women is when they're, I know there's different levels and we don't necessarily have to get all into that, but the covert narcissist is the one that usually holds the woman's attention for the longest period of time because they're just so stealth about themselves. And that's what creates this dynamic for a lot of the women that we work with, is because they're like, I just didn't see this coming. I thought a narcissist was going to be grandiose. I thought a narcissist was going to come through the door and everyone was going to be this charming. When I hear narcissism, I had a picture in my mind, but I didn't realize that there's different types of narcissists. And then I start figuring out, and then most of the time, I think it's important, especially as professionals in our due diligence, is we don't diagnose people that are not in the room. But however, if they're coming in with certain types of experiences that they had, we can say, it sounds like, what we know of these things, or read this and see this, right? And then they kind of come and put that picture together. Because I do think it's important that in our responsibility that we don't tell them who their partner is, especially if they're not in the room, but we do give them resources. And one of the resources is about narcissist or narcissism and the different types of um, categories, we should say, and then also explaining to them there is a difference, because I think from a society standpoint, we use this word so readily available now, and there's not necessarily education around. There's a difference between narcissistic personality disorder versus someone that has high narcissistic traits, and you may be experiencing some of that, because it's important for them, especially in our program, we believe it's important for them to understand that, because the one thing that keeps them in these relationships outside of some of the stuff that's underlining is hope. Is that taking these normal, they'll hear normal things, and especially whether it's psychology or self-help, take these normal ways of relating to people and try to put it on their abnormal relationship. And then they have so much hope that this relationship is going to change. But if they're with someone that has high narcissistic traits, that hope is what keeps them stuck. And it's important that we help them at some point understand that, so that their hope can be placed on them and not on the other person changing. Because with someone that has those narcissistic traits, it keeps them in the relationship a lot longer, 20, 30 years. It doesn't necessarily mean it's short-term relationships. Sometimes these are people that are married, that are in these love addicted, toxic dynamics throughout their entire relationship, where their spouse could be love bombing them, devaluing them, discarding them, and it happens all in relationships. And I think it's important to say that, in the sense that, because some people hear that, they think it's like dating relationships. No, this happens to people in long-term relationships. It's not short-term relationships. It's not dating relationships. It's just the fact that, and I'm using she because that's primarily who we work with, that she thinks she's crazy. She thinks there's something wrong with her. So she tries to cook more, sex more, perform, right? It's that performance where she tries to be the best wife or the best girlfriend, because maybe if I just do these things, he's going to come back around, and he will see my value and my worth. And ultimately, long term, that's her understanding that that's what she brought to the table. She didn't have that filled.
Well, for those of you who are listening, thanks so much for listening. This is, again, Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. And we have today with us Dr. Janie Lacy, and we're talking toxic relationships and love addiction. And Jeannie, I think you've got something you're dying to ask.
I know, because I'm listening to Janie. I'm like, ooh, I want to know more about that. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So, Janie, let's wind back to the hope, because that is a tricky, tricky one, where hope of waiting for breadcrumbs and maybe things will work out, which I see could keep you in a perpetual loop in an unhealthy relationship, versus hope of perhaps this is a season our relationship is in. And I hope that as we get through this and we work through, things will restabilize. Like, how does one, and I don't know if this is an answerable question, so I'll say that first, but how would you describe or discern between hope, which can be part of the dysfunctional looping, versus hope in a relationship that could be a healthy thing and more of a sign of patience? So,
Very complex question, right? But it's most basic sense.
I only ask the good ones here.
You absolutely do. And I do have an answer. So the broad stroke answer would be, from the most basic sense, right? There are problems and there are patterns. So when we look at hope from a healthy relationship standpoint, we're looking at a relationship problem. But if we're looking at hope potentially from a toxic, love addicted, maybe narcissistic, abusive relationship, there's been some patterns throughout the relationship, and she has been there time and time again, and it just looks different. So in her particular unique, because everyone's journey is unique, even though there are some hallmarks, everyone's unique, that in her journey, it's important to understand the difference between just relationship problems versus relationship patterns. And then once we understand the relationship patterns, then we can dig to another level to understand, is there love addiction here? Is there narcissistic abuse here? Is there, all the different things? And we use those labels and only to target treatment in particular. So that would be my broad stroke way. We kind of look at the hope answer, and I think that's important for her to understand about her life, because there are certain relationship problems that are common.
Yeah.
But when you kind of spread on all the other stuff, it kind of just gets colluded, and she's not necessarily knowing, north from south at that point.
So using hope as, or looking at the behavior, is there a pattern with other factors that may be dysfunctional, would be indicating a toxic relationship, versus hope of there's some problems and we resolve or we restabilize. What I'm saying is, it's not one, it's more one thing versus this is one factor of a cluster of problems.
Yes, you said it beautifully.
Okay. Okay. That's really helpful, because I can think of a lot of clients in my mind who are trying to figure out, do I stay in the relationship, continue to try to work at this, and is that healthy or unhealthy of me to try? Because they're trying to determine, am I in a toxic, repetitive pattern, or am I just, I'm not getting my needs met and I'm kind of angry about that, or I'm just losing hope that it'll get better. And
Yes.
so it's really, it's a tricky thing, I think.
It's very tricky, and that's why it's important that for each and every person that they have a unique set of circumstances. But if we kind of look at like some common signs, right? Because I think that's what you're getting into when you kind of look at clusters. You know, one of the things that people don't recognize in themselves is that there's this operation of fear, if we make it very basic, right? So in a healthy relationship that may have problems, there shouldn't necessarily be a fear factor in approaching your partner to address something, for example. Where in an addictive relationship, there's this underlining fear of potentially abandonment, right? So if I go to him and I tell him that I didn't like how he spoke to me last night, I feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just gonna, pick my battles, because you hear about picking your battles in relationships. I'm gonna pick my battles and I'm not gonna address it. But yet what she's really fearing is that underlining sense of, if I address these things, then, is he gonna leave me? And we know eventually she will get to those deeper core wounds, potentially one of abandonment, right? And then we're also looking at these obsessive thinking in some of her behaviors, where there's this constantly thinking about, let's say, for example, bringing up a problem. There's this obsessive thinking, how am I going to have this conversation with him? And just thinking about him all day long, when I should be working on my, whatever it may be that she's doing, because tonight when I see him, I'm going to have these conversations. That's where you kind of get into some things that are just not necessarily on the normative scale of relationships. And then we're looking at like mistaking intensity for intimacy. And I will hear some of the women say that, well, we just love hard, and we also fight hard. Or potentially culturally, this is how we are in our, family, bringing a whole nother cultural piece, another conversation for another day. But
Yeah.
there's these highs and lows, there's this turbulence, right? Where they don't necessarily understand genuine intimacy. And then another thing we'll see with our females in particular for us is that they compromise their personal value system. And sometimes they don't even know what their value systems were, but they thought they did, right? Because on the other side of that is treatment, understanding, having a strong sense of their self. And then we look at things like, these are things that people can think about, their inability to leave this relationship. They know that there's an expiration date. My values, everything has been compromised. There's no boundaries. I don't see myself growing. It's an anchor versus an engine, but I can't seem to leave this relationship. Or also on the dating side, sometimes when we take relationship dating, we do relationship timelines. There's been a serial dating where to get over, they get under someone else, right? Or they'll say they don't, in their mind, and I truly believe this, a lot of the women that we work with don't believe they were ever cheating, because I didn't sleep with him. but yet I was talking to this person on social media before I got my divorce, or I was talking to this person and we were talking about things very intimate before I truly broke up, right? So we help them hold the mirror to show them that there's been some serial dating. And then are they neglecting other areas of their life, right? So we can kind of go through all of those types of things to identify the cluster versus just the problem. So so yeah,
So
those would be a couple of examples.
what does
Beautiful, thank you. Let me just thank you, because that was a really beautiful description, helping discern between healthy and unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I can imagine a lot of listeners, like, okay, yes, 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 no, no, going through that. So thank you for showing all those examples and giving those descriptions, which I think furthers the definition. So thank you for that.
Sure.
I'm curious, what does the goal of everybody's journey is going to be unique, but I'm sure that there are sort of like commonalities. What does the goal of their journey look like? Is it always leaving the relationship, or is there ever a chance where the relationship dramatically changes? I assume that it's more than just getting out of a relationship. There's probably a lot more about what we see in recovery, which is I'm healing my relationship with myself and I'm feeling different about myself and I've got different boundaries. But when you're working with these women, what what does the goal of their journey typically look like? Where do they land?
Well, that's ever changing, right,
Yeah.
Tim? So when they come through the door, their goal of the journey is I want to get him right, or I need to get myself right in order to keep him. Or the other broad stroke is I just don't want to feel this anymore. I'm in so much pain that I just don't want to feel this anymore, right? So that's usually what kind of gets people in the door. They're not coming in during the love bombing stage or any of these types of things. They're coming in when there's some type of disruption of their relationship or some type of pain, or they were maybe abandoned. He left them for another woman, that type of thing. So the transformation of the goals happens while they are staying in some type of therapeutic process other than the crisis period. Because what we also see, if we want to use these terms, there's high relapse rate once things kind of get back to the we'll say the love bombing stage, or things are back where he left and didn't work out with while he was, testing out another car, and he came back to her and now everything's are good. But once they kind of stay with us long term, or they stay in some type of treatment long term, then the goal would be to have a healthy relationship with themselves and then with other people, if we want to make it very broad stroke. But the journey to get there is not easy. It sounds, when they hear it, they're like, well, sign me up for that. Where can I buy that? But then when we actually have to get into the work to do that, it's very difficult, because it's like cutting somebody open and here I am, all the things and all the stuff that's ever seen and unseen, right? Jehovah's window, things they've never seen in themselves, to really be able to take hold of that. It's a life journey. And if you kind of try to sell that to someone out the gate, they're going to go running for the hills. They're like, well, I'd rather take these toxic relationships any day than to climb that mountain, right? So that's why it's a transformation process. They have goals that come in. We see it all the time. It's like we know why they're there. There's a certain level of performance. Well, he tells me I need therapy, so I'm here. Or if I can just get myself right, then I can get that. Still, the golden star is to get that man or to get that person, if I can get myself self right. But the beauty, when I look at all the, because there are so many, there really are, that we've had the privilege, and I do say the privilege, to see them to the other side. The ones that have long-term recovery, that still send cards every year, whatever it may be, and those conversations, they'll say, well, if you would have ever told me, when I met you, what I was going to have to go through to get here, I would have ran for the hills. So we know that. We know that, but we also know they have to go through to get to, and it's very different. So the goal is to truly live and walk in self-awareness and self-education, and to transform their life where they can experience something that they've never experienced before. And my goal to be able to walk through with them is to also transform generations, because there's usually a generational
Yeah.
pattern that is here, that when we bring that to people's awareness, once they get to a certain point, I mean, they really are just changing ripple effects. And that's just the beauty, when you truly get to the other side of the war and battlefield.
Janie, when I listened to your TED Talk, there was a phrase that you said repeatedly, which is if you're willing to do the work. And it struck me because in graduate school, they say to therapists, hey, you meet your client halfway, and then they need to meet you to do the work. So can you talk a little bit about what that means for you, for clients, for your people that you work with, to be willing to do the work?
Absolutely. So, as the four of us sit here and we think about how difficult it is for us to change, right? If there's something that you want to change, maybe it could be something, anyone's listening, maybe it could be something like changing your weight. Maybe it's changing, you want to be more organized, whatever it may be. And we find ourselves back in the same thing over and over and over again. And we think about how difficult it is. So then we go down to the place of this phrase, do the work. It's difficult. It sounds great. I want to do the work. I want to make my yard beautiful. Like right now, I have these bushes that are dead in my front yard, and I need to pluck them up. And I see it every day when I'm pulling Wendy in my driveway. I'm like, I gotta get these bushes up, and I gotta replant it. So in order for me to make those bushes look beautiful, I gotta do the work by taking out those dead bushes, throw them away, get my hands dirty, be out. I'm in Florida, and right now it's 100 degrees, so be out in the sun, do this other thing. So I keep putting off doing the work because I know it's going to cause me a lot of pain. It's going to cause me a lot of sweat. I'm going to have to be out there. So when we say do the work, we have to get ready to get our hands dirty. We have to ready to really be able to put in the work, and putting in the work means I am putting everything else aside. I'm going to make time to go out and deal with those bushes. I'm going to get the right tools. I'm going to get the things I need to cut the bushes down, to dig the bushes up. I need the right tools. I probably need some support with me. And I need to be able to look at the goal that I have, which is the vision board on my Pinterest board of what I want that front yard to look like. So I have something I'm aiming to. And that process of me changing those bushes out is doing the work. So when we think about this in our own life, we have the right tools. We got to put time aside. We got to get ready to get our hands dirty. We got to have ready to have ugly cries that time. We got to have the right support system. We have to have that vision, that North Star, to know what we're working towards. And all of that stuff takes work. And that's, in a very metaphoric way, doing the work. But I think it's important for people to have empathy, though, because many times, even as clinicians, I think I experience in supervising a lot of people over the years that we can also lose our empathy. And that's why I always like to say, let's look at ourselves. Like, it's difficult to make changes in ourselves. So we can have empathy for our clients who we feel like we're revisiting over and over and over again. And I remember that every time right now, at least when I see my bush out front, that I'm like, I need to like get rid of that thing. I hate seeing it, right? We hate seeing parts of ourselves, but we still get used to seeing those parts of ourselves. I'm used to seeing that. It's probably been a couple of months now, Wendy, since those bushes have been out there. And I'm used to seeing that ugly bush that I need to get rid of. So I've learned to live with it. So how many times have we learned to live with things that are ugly, that we want to change, that causes us pain, whatever that may be, but now we're petting it. I'm greeting the bush when I come home every day. So in order to do the work, it's not going to be easy, because I also have to start with my mindset. My mindset has to say that, okay, I need to understand my North Star. Why do I want to change that bush? Why do I want to change my life? Why do I want to have a different pattern of relationships? Why do I not want to feel this way? Why do I not want to have this secret anymore? Whatever that may be, it's a process, and that is doing the work.
Thank you.
Janie, I love that. Thank you for that explanation and metaphor. When this posts, I'm going to take that part of the clip and just play it, for my groups and my clients. And that was
Absolutely.
perfect. Thank you.
And I need to change the bush.
We're gonna email you and say, so what about that bush?
Yeah,
That's
before and
what-
after, accountability, which we all need in our work.
Absolutely.
So if people are looking for you, where can they find you?
The basic place to start is my website, janielacy.com, and Lacy is Lacy, and then that kind of leads to all the social media. But all the social media, it's Dr. Janie Lacy. But if you put me in there, you can also see me in Court TV every week. That's a passion of mine, Court TV every week, and I delve into the psychological aspects of crimes of passion. A lot of times this love addiction and toxic relationships is directly tied into a lot of these cases. So I use that platform to educate many, and you can, find some of those links through my website.
Thank you so much. What a great conversation. I really appreciate that. So any last thoughts, Jeannie or Wendy, before we
Yeah.
wrap up?
Yeah.
For it.
Janie, I so appreciate your passion as well as your intelligence and clinical skills and the way that you are delivering this message. People can hear you. They can connect with what you're saying, which is helping them self-identify what might be healthier options or services to hold on to. So I feel your passion. I feel you when you're talking about this, and I absolutely love that. So thank you for so much for coming to share it with the folks who are listening here. But thank you for the work that you're doing, because I hear you, like when you brought up the Court TV, that you're sort of strategically, how do I get message out? Because I want to help the folks out there, and I want to help them understand and realize, because change is possible, healthy is possible. And I'm just having a big crush on you right now. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Yes, and I'm thinking, you know, if you'd be willing to do another episode at another time. We just touched on the abandonment wounds that women who suffer from toxic relationships and from sex addiction and love addiction have, I believe, as an underlying wound. But we didn't even start to talk about shame. Another question I had is, you know, are they really thinking about, well, why am I staying with this guy? Is there something wrong with me? We didn't even touch that. So that's for next time. But thank you so much for all the work you're doing. It's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me and allowing me to use this time to share the message.
Wow, you're welcome. It's such a pleasure to connect with you. I mean, I get to see you rather frequently in our board involvement with the American Foundation for Addiction Research, which I thoroughly enjoy. So it's fun to talk to you in a different context today.
Yes, and you as well, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today on Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. Please rate us and like us and give us 5 stars and all those things on all the different platforms where you find us. And if you've got questions that have come up about today's episode, sex addiction, betrayal, trauma, or anything else you would like us to talk about, send us those questions at conversations.sar@gmail.com, and we will include those in a mailbag. Have a wonderful day, everyone. I wish you all the best on your journey. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation.
Thanks, everybody.